So this is the entrance to the Duncan Edwards Museum. As you can see, this is our stairway to heaven. Each of the steps is a name of one of the victims of the Munich air crash, right to the top till we get to Duncan Edwards himself. So we've now come up the stairs and we are in the entrance of the museum. As you can see on the wall there is the plaque of the opening. When we opened the museum last August, we were officially opened by Jimmy Murphy's family, his son and his 3 grandsons. And we're really, really proud of the fact that it was Jimmy Murphy's family that unveiled the museum for us. The museum is set out as a living storybook, if you like. So there's different sections to the museum. We are in the 1930s living room. So this represents Duncan's house in 1936. And Duncan was born at this house here, in that room, 23 Malvern Crescent, in the Woodside area of Dudley. They were heroes' houses. The estate had just been opened in 1929 for people coming home from war, and the family lived at Malvern Crescent. There's lots of memories about Duncan and his childhood. Over on the sideboard is a wonderful photograph of Duncan as a little boy. As you can see, he's already a very big child at that point. He's not even 2 there. And there's memories of people that would be war heroes, his uncles that fought in the war. So this is Dudley, Malvern Crescent, 1936. So the living room holds lots of memories of Duncan. There's photographs of his family. There's the photograph of the house that his parents lived in. They were actually next door neighbours, childhood sweethearts. His 2 uncles, Thomas and Sidney, war heroes. Sidney died in the First World War in Iraq, and Thomas survived the Second World War but was seen as a hero because he helped to liberate Belsen concentration camp. So there's a real family history there. And there's the birth and death certificates of his little sister Carol Ann. But now we're going to go to 1940s Dudley as we go to Duncan's bedroom. So we've just left the 1936 living room and we are now in the 1940s bedroom, and we're in 1944. So the world is still at war. So Duncan would have his gas mask close by. The family have now moved from Malvern Crescent in Woodside, and they've gone to the other side of the town onto the Priory estate, and they are at number 31 Elm Road. So this is a typical boy's bedroom of the time, and as you can see on Duncan's bedroom wall there is lots of posters of footballers, because already, even though Duncan was still really quite young, he was mad about football and was already proving to have a real talent for it. So he's got lots of football memorabilia. He's also got a picture of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, his other heroes, because Duncan was a dancer. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little while. And Rita Hayworth, who was his absolute idol. But there's lots of things about Duncan in this room, because as well as football he enjoyed fishing, so we've got fishing rods in here. We have fossils, because Duncan lived near to the Wren's Nest estate in Dudley, and that has recently become a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of the fossils, the very fossils that Duncan used to go hunting for. So there's a big history in Dudley that we do tell you about as well as Duncan and other characters. There's lots of wonderful characters, lots of history in Dudley, and you'll learn more about that as we go around the museum. But now we're going to leave the 1940s and we're going to step into the 1950s. So just like the storybook telling the tales of Narnia, walking through the wardrobe, we walk through the wardrobe to see Duncan's magical world. So let's go through and see what was so wonderful about 1950s for Duncan. So we've left behind the 1930s and the 1940s, and we are in 1951 at the Wolverhampton Street School here in Dudley, where Duncan was a pupil. And at this point, people had really begun to notice Duncan and this extraordinary talent that he had for football. On his desk is a copy of an essay that he wrote entitled A True Wish, and it tells of his desire to play at Wembley Stadium. It's dated 1951, and a year later that's exactly what he does when he plays for England for the schoolboys at Wembley Stadium. On the wall there is Duncan's original Worcestershire schoolboy tie and the badge from his blazer. But there's a school teacher in this photo here called Stella Cook, and she really believed that Duncan could become a professional dancer. So he did sword, morris and ballroom dancing, and she really believed that he was good enough to become a professional. But Duncan's career was already being marked out for him. He played for his school, his county, when Dudley used to be in Worcestershire rather than the West Midlands. He played for the Birmingham counties, and as I say, a year later he played for his country. And at this point he was being recognised in the street, and he was being talked about the way that David Beckham was talked about in the 90s. Duncan was well on his way to becoming a major. In October 1952, Duncan officially signed for Manchester United, and he was now a famous footballing star, but he still had to do his national service, and Duncan joined the Royal Army Ordnance Corps and was stationed in Shrewsbury, and this enabled him to play for the Army football team in the morning, and then he would dash up to Manchester to play for Manchester United in the afternoon. So he was in the army with his best friend Bobby Charlton, who of course went on to be Sir Bobby, and he was a very, very popular lad in the army. But Duncan still had football on his mind, and he couldn't leave the army quick enough to return to his beloved Old Trafford. In this section of the museum we have just a very small selection of the photographs which show Duncan not only playing for Manchester but also for his country when he played for England. But still, even though he was at his beloved Old Trafford, Duncan was very much still a black country lad, and it was something that he was very proud of. The most significant picture on this wall, however, is the one of himself and his fiancée Molly Leach, and they were due to get married in July 1959. She really was the love of his life, and it does show that Duncan had a life, of course, off the football pitch. He was still only a young lad at this point when he got engaged to Molly. The 1950s is still seen as the golden age of football, and Manchester United, because of the wonderful leadership by Matt Busby, went into the European Cup, and they were playing and they were succeeding, and really people believed that this team was going to bring the silverware home. They played their final game in the former Yugoslavia in Serbia at Red Star Belgrade, and they won on aggregate, and Duncan and his teammates were really on a high, and they literally had the world at their feet. The celebrations at Red Star Belgrade proved to be the Busby Babes' final swan song. On their return home to the Ringway Airport in Manchester, they stopped at the Munich airport to refuel. They had landed in a blizzard, and things weren't looking good for the team to get home. But FA rules dictated that they needed to be there to play Wolverhampton Wanderers on the Saturday. After 2 failed takeoffs, they returned to the waiting room only to be called again, and as they boarded the plane for the 3rd time, it crashed on the end of the runway, crashed into a house and the perimeter fence, and 7 of the Busby Babes perished on a snowy runway in Munich. As well as the famous Busby Babes being on that plane, there were also some of Britain's most prolific sports journalists, and this is our tribute to those men that died alongside the Busby Babes that day. One of the famous sports journalists was Frank Swift, the former Manchester City goalkeeper. It was a huge loss to the world of sport that day, not only because of so many footballers dying, but because these men that sent the stories home. After a brave fight for life, Duncan sadly died 15 days after the Munich air crash. It was another bitter blow, not only to Manchester but to British football. He, along with the Babes, will remain these wonderful footballers that are frozen in time, but of course all of them was somebody's son, somebody's husband, somebody's hero. One of the wonderful characters that was lost that day in Munich was Eddie Coleman, and Eddie Coleman, as well as being Busby Babe, has another claim to fame. Eddie was big friends with a man called Tony Warren, and Tony, of course, wrote the longest running soap opera in the world, Coronation Street. The character of Elsie Tanner, played by the wonderful Pat Phoenix, was the only character, along with The Rover's Return, to have a telephone. And in the early 70s, when it was started to be filmed in colour, it was a red telephone to represent United. And somewhere on the set, a character will have a red telephone to represent Manchester United. 30 years after the Munich air crash, a character called Eddie Duncan was introduced as a local footballer in memory of Eddie Coleman and Duncan Edwards. And I think that is a wonderful connection between the Busby Babes and this iconic soap opera. So we are now in our mini theatre, and this is where I hold the celebrant services for Manchester United supporters, Duncan Edwards fans, people who love nostalgia, that wants to have their wedding blessed or their child named, or if there's a memorial for someone that you've lost. This is where it happens in the museum. Our final exhibit is one that is really poignant, because this is the exact replica of the monument that is in Tudering in Munich. And Tudering is the little village where the air crash actually happened and where the remaining part of the plane came to a standstill. At the end of the runway, they named Manchesterplatz. The German authorities renamed it in memory of the Munich air crash. The idea of the Duncan Edwards Museum is to remember a wonderful young lad that came from my hometown. I don't think you need to support Manchester United or even like football to appreciate the fact that he was a young working class lad that believed that he could, and he did. And it is his inspiration that is giving lots of young people in Dudley aspirations for the future. The museum is all based on a promise that I made to his mum, and I hope I do her and Duncan proud.